Chapple, thank you very much for joining us on the bench today.
No, it's an absolute pleasure.
Tell us a bit about Robin Chapple. Who is Robin Chapple?
A bit of a free spirit, and I got that really because a number of issues. I lost my siblings quite early on in my life, and as a result my parents doted on me, and that gave me a freedom. My father used to say to me, I don't care what time you come in, just tell me what time you're coming in, and if you're a minute late, I'll ground you. And so I used 10 o'clock, Dad, that's fine. 11 o'clock, Dad, that's fine. 1 o'clock, Dad, fine. Came in at 10 past 1, grounded. So it was always about, me learning my parameters and being responsible for my own actions. And that's, if anything, what my parents gave me.
What was your first job?
My first job was actually doing engineering at what was then called Westlake, or near us, which was where we used to build McLaren racing cars. And how I got it was, I was mad fiend about motor racing. And so I used to roll up at McLaren's each morning and sort of say, you've got a job for me, and they go, piss off. And I did that for 3 months, and eventually they, you've got to get this guy out of the rain. So they gave me a job, £7 a week, as a trainee sort of apprentice engineer, working on magnesium wheels for McLaren.
And how long did that last?
Well, it actually was going to last quite a long while, but they moved their facility from Rye up into Oxford, and I was very much a homebody person, so I actually stayed down in Romney Marsh, and then went and worked for an industrial farming enterprise, which sounds funny. It was one of the largest sort of farms at 1,000 acres in England at the time, and we were doing pea cooling, which is a process of preparing peas for canneries. We had a credit cross pigs, which was removing the naturally occurring, what do they call it? A naturally occurring, I'm trying to think of the word. It's a naturally occurring chest infection that pigs get from their parents. And the way of stopping that was to actually get the piglet born into a separate environment from the mother. So it never actually saw the mother, never suckled off the mother. It was born into a sterile environment. And they actually created this, a range of pigs called a credit cross pigs, which didn't have this systemic chest problem, which meant that they could breed better, their size was 10% larger, all of these sorts of things.
So your first two jobs as a young adult, you've moved from being a rev head working on magnesium wheels to being effectively a biochemist or working on a new generation of genetically modified pig.
Yeah, absolutely.
What came after that?
Although what came after that was I then went to the stock exchange. My father was a stockbroker, and he sort of gave me the, son, you've got to come and follow in your father's footsteps. Yes, Dad. But he wouldn't employ me in his company, so I went to AA Bendon, which was a broker firm, and had the privilege of being the youngest blue button on the floor of the London Stock Exchange. A blue button is a junior a trader, so I was trading on the floor of the house, doing my 8 miles a day, walking around, and bidding on things on behalf of clients, buying and selling stocks and shares.
You obviously didn't feel that stockbroking or career in the capital markets was going to be yours?
No, and there is a backstory to that, but mercifully not for the camera.
Talk to us about your arrival in Australia, because we'll gradually get on to 2001 and your election to Parliament.
1974, the plan was to come to Australia and then actually, I do things very much on a whim, without a good thought process. And so I was going to come to Australia, I was going to go to New Guinea, get myself a boat, and then sail down through the Galapagos to South America, because I heard there was a really good guy down there called Che Guevara. I'm really pleased I didn't make it. But
He wishes you had.
yeah, but that was the sort of the thought process. As I say, I'm very much a free spirit, and what grabs me at the moment takes me. I arrived in Australia in 1974 with this plan, but it didn't last long because I came across Indigenous people who weren't African. Because you've got to remember, in England in 1974, nobody knew there was an Aboriginal population in Australia. So having, just prior to getting here, I was in 1972 in the Bangladesh Civil War with Oxfam, doing relief work. That was a bit of my sea change. Got here to Australia and went, who are these people? And a job came up at Yirrkala to go up and work with the First Nation people, the Gumatj people in Arnhem Land, and so I grasped that. And then for the next 10 years I worked on remote Aboriginal communities, Yirrkala, Fink, Papunya, and it was only because of a bureaucratic stuff-up that I didn't stay there. I was then sent to Yalata to take up a position at Yalata, only to find that my house hadn't been built yet. It was planned for the next year, you know. So,
I mean, Robin, I've been to the beautiful seaside town of Rye,
Yep.
and outback WA and Northern Territory. I mean, you couldn't. There's no bigger difference in those two worlds.
No, absolutely. Oh, mind you, the Romney Marsh, very flat,
Well, when the tide runs
barren,
out,
yes.
and you can walk to France, I guess.
That's right. But again, the big wide open spaces, flat land, big space, really appeals to me.
A bit more water than there's.
Oh, yeah.
Well, depends, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so I suppose I wanted to experience. Everything has been about wanting to experience in my life. And so going out there and working with First Nation people, I was very privileged at Papunya. We were still meeting people in first contact. And so that was fascinating. And very important for my understanding of Aboriginal society and people in general. There was an old man called Nosepeg Juparula out there, who was actually the man who found Lassiter's body with Bob Buck. And we were out on country, we got stuck out one day and we couldn't do anything, so he started talking about law and culture and those sorts of things. And he said, the problem with you white fellas is that you don't understand that you want to own land, but from our perspective, the land owns us. Now, it's a concept that I've struggled with ever since then. I can sort of comprehend it, but I can't understand it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And you talk to many Aboriginal people and you use those words and they say, that's it. And I don't think until we actually grasp that this it replaces in our society what we call our parental structure, our family tree. That's their family tree. And that's why you suddenly get this huge relationship to country, the importance of country. And so, if anything, that's what I learned out of that process.
So you talk about the First Nations interpretation of the land owns us.
Yeah.
In your engagement then with them and also the business community, the mining industries up there, how difficult was it to explain to them a concept that you were still grappling with?
It is difficult. I have been to the Chamber of Minerals and Energy on one occasion to talk about the whole issue of native title, and I did proffer that view. And it was interesting, there was a wide variety of people out there, and some of the anthros were furiously nodding their head, whereas there was a level of disbelief at some level from that. And I think that is what's very difficult for people to, it is difficult to grasp. As I say, I grapple with it myself. As I say, I comprehend it, I don't understand it. And I don't mean I don't understand it disrespectfully. I cannot empathise with that view. And I think it takes a lot for people to be empathise with the view that that is more important than my family lineage.
When did you become political? Or a politician, I should say.
Yeah, well, actually quite...
A pre-parliamentary politician, yeah.
Something else I used to do was I used to do a lot of running. And I was president of the Port Hedland Running Club. And I did a half marathon, did my knee, couldn't run for a long while. You know, wasn't getting the endorphins I needed, getting really grumpy. And so I decided to run for local government. And my campaign slogan, President of the Running Club, running for you in the council elections. Got elected. So I did 7 years in local government, and that's what really introduced me to a large degree to politics. Now we come to the terrible admission. I was, for a while, the president of the Kalgoorlie North electorate division of the ALP.
Stop the cameras right now.
And then later on I happened to meet Joe Valentine, and I really got an idea from Joe Valentine about participatory democracy, the grassroots drive politicians, and so that was really important for me. And basically myself and somebody else in the ALP at that time decided we'd had enough, and then I gave a bit of a space before I started running, and then I started running for Parliament. Federal elections, seat of Kalgoorlie, state elections, mining and pastoral. Because I actually thought there was more. I'd become fairly involved in the environment up in Port Hedland and around those areas, turtle-related issues, wetlands, needed protection. I learned a bit about samphires and mangroves, and God knows, I mean, this is totally out of my comfort zone. So, yeah, I slowly moved in that direction, and the Greens fitted that space for me. Then comes the bizarre sort of scenario that I was just the bloke who always ran. Sixth election, running for mining and pastoral, and in 2001, I'm working in the counting centre in managing, the vote for North Metro, South Metro, just checking, doing the scrutineering. And the guy who was running the mining and pastoral division sort of said, we're going to pull the lever in mining and pastoral. And I'm, at the moment, busily checking some votes in North Metro. And I said, no, can't be bothered, go ahead, because I wasn't going to get elected, there was no chance. So he said, no, I think you should come in. Oh, all right. So you want me in there as a token crying? No, come in. So I went in there, and they go through the Libs got elected, Labor got elected, One Nation got elected, and oh my God, Robin Chapple got elected number 6. So suddenly I found myself in Parliament. Yeah.
We had a wonderful conversation with Aaron Stonehouse a couple of benches ago, and he talks about his election night. He was asleep because he didn't think he had any chance of getting in. You weren't asleep. You were actually helping count the votes for other people to get elected. What went through your mind then when the realisation dawned? Sorry, before it dawned. When you were told, "Oh, you're in."
It was, oh my God, what do I do now? This is going to be one of my longest jobs ever, 4 years, and I've got to stick with it and be effective.
There goes that free spirit.
Yeah, to a degree. But having said that, getting elected to mining and pastoral, 2.24 million square kilometres of the most beautiful country that we've got in Western Australia, I'm free. I've got the Canning Stock Route, I've got the remote Aboriginal communities, I've got the Kimberley, I've got Ningaloo Reef. Who wouldn't want to get elected for that electorate?
Just for some of our audience who might not be from Western Australia, I mean, you've touched on the size of your electorate, 2.2 million square kilometres. That's Britain, France, Spain, Italy, Germany.
Yep, the whole of Europe.
Wrapped together.
Yeah. Any other place in the world, it would be half a dozen countries.
Does that, yet your electorate is just shy of 70,000?
Yeah. And
people.
And 56 odd maybe vote. So very, very small. If I'm out in the pastoral country, it's a good 400 kilometres between houses, so that's the distance. And you've got to remember that you've got Kalgoorlie, which is a distinct population, very mining focused, very historic. You've got Port Hedland, again mining but very new. You've got the Kimberley, which is very, very old, very traditional, 40% Aboriginal population up there. Real strong culture. It is half a dozen countries. And I actually have to deal with each of those areas quite distinctly.
So is there such a thing as an overarching theme or need for your constituents, or can you not approach it that way? Do you have to make sure that, you know, what suits Kalgoorlie doesn't suit Ningaloo, doesn't suit Broome, doesn't suit, you know, Port Hedland?
My view is that I think on some issues about regional support, that's generic. But everything else, different climate, different sets of conditions, different housing, different style of lifestyle. It is quite distinct. So you really do have to, I don't say tailor your message, you don't change your message, but you deal with messaging that is appropriate to the area. Port Hedland, Karratha, it's very much about fly in, fly out. The Kimberley, it's very much about culture and heritage. Kalgoorlie is very much about making sure that Kalgoorlie, which is also a third of the electorate, gets the services they need. They're one of the biggest centres in Western Australia outside Perth. So Kalgoorlie-Boulder, you've got to cater for almost a metrocentric, I can't get the word out, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Metrocentric.
Yep.
You've got to get that sort of issue. It's very much about a metropolitan style environment in Kalgoorlie.
How do you keep on track of, on top of, I should say, all those issues? Because yes, it makes sense that infrastructure is probably one of those overarching issues. Culture in general, First Nations in general probably is too, but then within that, of course, you've got totally different issues by region. Environment maybe?
Look, environment, that's quite different in all those different areas. I mean, Kimberley, the least spoilt wilderness anywhere in the world.
So important everywhere, but different degrees of...
That's right. So you then come down to the Pilbara, where I'm talking to mining companies, Rio, BHP, about environmental management, end of mine life closure plans, those sorts of things. So it's environment, but it's completely different sort of subset. In Kalgoorlie, it's usually the disparity between small miners and big miners. You know, there seems to be a huge problem in that area around those issues. How do I keep track of it? Well, I suppose I've learnt. I'm very lucky. I've been in Parliament for 12 years, but actually been there 16 if you count that little break in the middle there. So longevity enables you to gain a deep understanding of the regions. And so I suppose that comes with time. Initially I knew the Pilbara. I mean, that's where I came from when I first got elected. Really didn't know the Kimberley, where I now live. Had very little to do with Kalgoorlie. But over time, my relationship and my ability to work in those areas has improved because I've learnt more. Everything in life, going back to that whole free spirit, is a matter of learning. So I can continue to learn, and I will never stop learning. And so I learn the electorate more and more as I go, and you learn the nuances of who the key players are and who's with whom and how, and that's very much a local issue, but you've got to do that over 2.24 million square kilometres.
How many kilometres would you travel each year on electoral matters? And there's a lot of flying, appreciate that, but I'm sure also a lot of gravel.
I have a vehicle out there which is fairly famous. It's been stolen once and used in a ram raid. I recently hit a cow in it. It has a lot of repairs. The cow totaled.
Steak.
Wish I'd had a decent sharp knife with me, but I didn't. But it's difficult to work out. But when Parliament's not sitting, most of the time I'll be out there somewhere. Now, if it's I leave the vehicle somewhere. At the moment it's in Karratha. I'll be flying up to Karratha at the end of this 2-week sitting, pick up the vehicle, and I'll head to the Kimberley. And I'll be stopping all along the way. Now, I recently had an issue with the ATO. They couldn't understand how I was doing all these kilometres. So they wanted to know who I'd met with all the way. And I'm saying, well, mostly 50 to 100 people, popping into a pastoral station, catching up with a mayor here or there or wherever, and talking to constituents. I am not going to keep a record of every person I meet. It would be impossible. So I do meet with a lot of people, but I don't do the race rounds, that sort of thing. That's not my scene. I'll roll up and talk to people I know. They've said, Joe Bloggs has got a problem. I recently did some work for a guy, 101 years old, in Karratha, who was having trouble getting a phone. And he'd tried everything to get his phone reconnected. So that was my little bandwagon for it. And I got his phone fixed, got it all on, and really happy. So that's some of the minutiae that I deal with. And that's what I see my role as being, is actually helping people on the ground, dealing with those little issues. Obviously you've got the big policy issues that I deal with in Parliament.
Just in terms of local issues and local constituents, seeing that that electorate is being represented by a number of different parties, how much collaboration is there between the reps and the upper and the lower house in that part of the world? And I'm thinking also around maybe some infrastructure or transport coordination or...
Very little. And there's most probably more relationship between upper house Liberals and their Liberal counterparts in the lower house, obviously because they've got a connection. But you've got to remember that WA Parliament sort of sets itself up to be independent upper house and independent lower house. And I've seen many battles over the 16 years that I've been there where the upper house is telling the lower house to go and get whatever. There is a huge, there is a political divide between the upper house and the lower house, and it always has been. And I find that quite fascinating. So I remember a member who moved from the lower house to the upper house had moved a motion in the lower house bemoaning the fact that we had afternoon tea and we actually had a break, whereas they had afternoon tea and they didn't have a break. So he comes up to the upper house and the president calls him to one side and says, for the first week you don't get afternoon tea. So, even at a juvenile level, there is that divide.
I'll get on to parliamentary behaviour in a minute and with this juvenile. Robin, do you, as the Greens WA representative in the mining and pastoral region, do many people come up to you and say, well, that sounds a bit odd, talk about bedfellows who don't normally get on?
Well, it's interesting. I do work with the mining industry. I worked for BHP originally. I worked for Lang Hancock out in Western Gorge, Whitman. So I've worked in the mining industry, so I have some empathy with them. I've actually got we have disagree on certain issues, but recently when it came to the Brendan Grill's 25 cents, I was backing the mining industry because it was the most stupid piece of legislation that could ever have been introduced, because it actually had no legal effect, could never come into being. So it wasn't that I didn't agree that the mining company shouldn't pay some more in royalties, it was just the process that was being used was totally flawed. The 25 cents was originally a $2.06 add-on to a lease payment that was to actually help government provide the infrastructure over the formative years. It was then to be phased out.
I mean, we hear a lot of feedback in the city about public trust in the resources sector, seeing it's such a dominant sector in this state. Out in Whoop Whoop, outside of the metro areas and the great population centres, what is sort of the view of the big corporations? And of course in WA they are the resources companies.
Look, the major corporations, and I've really got to be careful I don't start sort of picking winners here, but the major corporations do what is required in the best way that they can. Is doing what is required enough? When we look at the contribution in other countries from the major resource sectors into the state economy, but also into the regions, I would suggest they most probably aren't. But I think that we've always tinkered around this. We've never actually really addressed some of the fundamentals. I think the most telling statement ever made was in 2003 in the AMEC annual report, when they actually said we have to stop kidding ourselves that the mining industry is a sustainable industry. It is not. When our resource is gone, we're gone, and therefore we're not sustainable. And I think that if we could really grasp that and look to the future of the state, because that worries me, 74, 75 years to 100 years time, when we're out of iron ore, what are we going to be doing? We don't have a reserve fund. We're 127th in the world for a future fund. I mean, you've got Norway and all the other companies that have countries, that have actually had a resource structure, have future funds that they could retire on. We have nothing. We have not banked anything. And now we've got a terrible situation, $42 billion in debt, running deficit budgets. As an ex-stockbroker, this appalls me. We have just, excuse the expression, pissed it against the wall, and we've got nothing to show for it.
Going back to politics, and with the exception of some of the afternoon or morning tea sort of routines, how's politics changed in the house up the road here, the big house, since 2001, since you were first elected? What changes have you seen?
Okay, I think most probably politics is politics, and we train people in politics. I go to youth parliament and I sometimes sort of run that as their president, and I actually have to tell them to stop saying "here, here," because they think that's what everybody does in parliament, or interjecting and calling people nasty names, because that's not what really parliament is about. That's politics, the theatre. We have debates once a week called private members' time, where one party will get up and either commend themselves on the work they have done or blame the other side for the work they haven't done. And we waste 80 minutes a week on doing that. And we do it every week. And I'm sure that the motions are repetitive and have been repetitive for the last 16 years. I think we should get on with the business. And because it's not reported, it doesn't generate any media, it doesn't go back to constituents, it is just egos standing up and shouting at each other. And that, I don't think, is good governance.
But Robin,
that appalls me.
Yeah, Robin, the flip side, and I hear your point about sort of pandering to egos or ego flattery. But the flip side is you say that this doesn't generate any media. Is Parliament, and I'm being generic here, states or Canberra, too focused on media sound, on creating media sound bites?
Oh yeah.
At the expense of proper debate?
I can remember a former Premier once telling me, if you can't say it in 30 seconds, don't say it. 3 seconds, sorry. If you can't say it in 3 seconds, don't say it.
What was your response?
And my response was, that's ridiculous.
That took 3 seconds.
Actually, now knowing what the media demands, there is some rationale in that. And it's terrible, because you never actually get to explain the reality of a situation. You're using a sound grab. I don't like what the government's doing because it is, it's not thinking about humanity, it's not thinking about people. That's the grab. It doesn't tell you anything about what we're dealing with. So I don't like the process of what XYZ is happening because XY. And you'll have media say, now, can you encapsulate that for us? They actually prompt you. I remember I was phoned up by a media organisation and they said, okay, BHP is going to build a jetty system and a new loading facility out in the ocean. What don't you like about it? And I said, it's bloody brilliant. Deathly silence. Can you you got any criticism on it? And I went, no, actually, it's saving all the mangroves, it's doing a really good job. Do you know anybody who doesn't like it that we can interview? Bit of a worry.
Robin, away from Parliament, how do you relax?
I do like what I do in Parliament, so I do a lot of work outside of Parliament, weekends and stuff like that. At the moment, over the weekend, I've been writing a submission on the Burrup, so that's what but I enjoy that level of investigation and that sort of work. But beyond that, photography, I love the bush, and I'm in the process of being an owner builder up on my block, and so when I get up there I have a chance to put up another wall or put the loo in or do something like that. So getting my hands working again in a very practical sense takes me completely out of my parliamentary comfort zone. So doing something different.
Best spot in WA?
Ooh, it's a bit like saying, which do you prefer, the Eagles or the Dockers, isn't it really?
No.
No, right, okay. Best spot in WA. Oh dear.
So I think the answer to your question...
I would actually have to say some of the solitude that I've had out in the desert. It's not a place I would live, but on the Talawanya track or out on the Canning-Stock route, under the desert oaks, hearing the whistling, with a flock of 4,000 budgerigars, and total silence other than that. It takes a lot to beat that for me.
Seeing you ask the question yourself, Dockers or Eagles? And I hope you're not one of the Minister for Mines Petroleum, sort of set. Bill Johnson admitted he supports Collingwood.
Oh no, I'm not going there. Look, Bill and I have no relationship there at all whatsoever. Look, I have to say that I was an Eagles fan, and I still hold on to the Eagles, but I'm WA. So whoever is in ascendancy out of the Eagles and Dockers going towards the grand final will have my full support. But if it's Eagles versus Dockers, it's the Eagles.
Robin, thank you so far. We'll just finish off with the Fast and Furious 30 seconds, the word associations. So if you're ready.
Yeah.
Legislative Council.
Slow.
Constituent.
Important.
Elections.
A method of, one word.
We can have a few words, it needs to be short and sharp. 3 seconds as a former
Premier
Premier said.
method of actually supporting the community.
Red tape.
Interesting, I'm not so one that says there is a lot of red tape. I think bureaucracy is the problem.
The budget.
Terrible.
GST.
GST, little understood.
Plastic bags.
The scourge of the planet.
The Outback.
Brilliant.
The Burrup.
My love. My passion.
The North West Shelf Gas Project. On the Burrup.
Evil personified.
Mark McGowan.
Dry.
Mike Nahan.
Drier.
Richard Di Natale.
Brilliant.
Prime Minister. And I left that open because I wasn't sure.
Yeah, okay. What are we doing?
The media.
Reporters.
Twitter.
Don't do it really.
NBN.
Haven't got it.
Gravel roads.
Gravel roads. Part of the epitome of the bush.
And seeing I asked you earlier about Eagles or Dockers and you said you go for WA.
Yeah.
What about the Dockers?
I like the Dockers. There's some really, I have to say there's some really good players in both teams. And I'm not trying to dodge the bullet here. You've got Matt Fife in the Dockers. You've got Nick Natanui in the Eagles. Why can't we just merge them and have the best team in the world? But having said that, at the end of the day, I will always come down on behalf of the Eagles. Dockers get my very, very clear second vote.
Oh, well, supplementary question. West Coast Dockers.
beat the world.
Robin Chapple, thank you very much for your time.
No worries, pleasure.